How does it feel to kick a Palestinian from his home? To burn it all down. I'm fucking Bob Dylan and I supported the JDL at one time. Ray?
Yeah.
It's me, Bob Dylan.
Aren't you a Christian or something? I thought that you converted.
I became a Christian. Before that, I liked Meir Kahane. He had a couple good ideas.
Yeah, he was a real ideas man.
Yeah, really. I do love the fact that Bob Dylan wrote this, song about fucking the Birchers and how absurd they are. And then he becomes like a supporter of the JDL and Meir Kahane, who is a fucking Bircher. And okay, is not as crazy sounding as fluoridated water, communism, or precious bodily fluid stuff, but it's still pretty bad.
But JDL was fighting
He's super racist.
But they were fighting Nazis, right? So
they were, yes, they liked fighting black people more.
Okay.
They fought Nazis. They particularly liked fighting black people. That was their forte for the first few years.
Not even black political groups, just black people?
Political groups, yes, but also people. Crime.
Yeah.
You're against crime.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get to that. Welcome back to The Empire Never Ended. It's me, Boris, and I'm here with Ray.
Hi.
How do you feel, Ray? I swear that's the end of Bob Dylan for me today. I can't.
I've been listening to a lot of Richard Spencer streams.
Jesus Christ.
I guess there are streams because he's something between a stream and a podcast. He's making people who listen to his streams talk to him, actually talk to him. He doesn't allow them to use chat. So he kind of makes...
It's the old call-in model from back in the day.
I guess so, yeah.
He's missing the days of cable and cable television.
He's very... he's weird and definitely not as smart as he thinks he is.
That's often the case with these people.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10.
I mean, I don't want to say he's some extraordinarily dumb, but not super smart either. Often the people who listen to him are kind of smarter than he is in some areas at least. I was listening to him when they were commenting on the Tyler Robinson's Discord chats.
Okay.
And when I guess Tyler was arrested already, then the people in the Discord were writing some things, and someone wrote something very Mormon-y, we should remember that God is a living God, and all of the sinners are called upon to become saints, something like that. And Richard Spencer was like, wait, what does this mean? Does this mean, are they calling him a saint? Is this? And then everyone in the stream was saying they're Mormons. It's and he was 10 minutes puzzled by this and what it means. I don't know almost anything about Mormons, but I know they're called the Church of Latter-day Saints. So obviously something about becoming a saint is a very kind of Mormon-y thing to say. But otherwise he's kind of I don't know, he's crazy because they're all white nationalists.
Yeah.
Obviously. But he's kind of he voted for Kamala, and hates MAGA, and because he kind of came to the realization that like he should support the American liberal project because that's the way that the American empire was built and survived. Like if they did some kind of a actual Nazi thing, then probably there would have been like a Bolshevik revolution or some kind of a counter reaction to that. And this was the way for it to kind of flourish and survive. And for that reason, he wants to support that project from kind of the project of like American liberalism, I guess, because
from a Nazi perspective.
Because like that's kind of what's good for the American empire, which is ultimately what's good for the white race. Is how I understand his political position. I'm not exactly sure.
But okay, I mean, this is some expert level brain rot. I
mean, yeah. But it's like, I don't know, it's very weird to listen to. He sometimes have fights with like some of his listeners and fans are kind of affiliated with the like young Republicans, and he really likes to bash them. Like when there was this, I guess, a scandal with the kind of Nazi chat messages of the young Republicans saying how
they like the ones that were like, oh, we love Hitler, and all that stupid shit.
Richard Spencer was saying, yeah, like I'm not surprised. Like there's lots of people in the Republican Party who are Nazis and love Hitler, and like I've been affiliated with some of those people for I don't know decades. There was always like you get them a beer and they talk about how much they love Hitler, and then some of his followers were kind of offended by that because they're like personal friends with those people.
Right,
and they're trying to downplay like they're not actually Nazis. And Richard Spencer was like, "Well, I mean, what does that mean?"
I think Kahane would agree. I think he would say that basically scratch the surface of any like American Gentile, and you'll eventually find a Nazi.
Yeah,
as in you'll eventually find an anti-Semite, and that's what we're here to talk about today.
And not Richard Spencer.
Because we're back here for part 3 of our series on Rabbi Meir Kahane. And now we are finally getting to what he's kind of best known for. Well, one of the things he's best known for in the United States and around the world, and that's the Jewish Defense League, aka JDL.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. I think he would have... I'm sorry, I'm now thinking about the Richard Spencer thing. It's going to get me sidetracked. Maybe we should just push forward.
Okay.
Because I'm thinking about it, and he's like, I mean, because he has very particular thoughts about liberalism too. I don't know. Mm-hmm. We can get into that, but maybe we should recap a little bit from our last episode, since that was a paywalled episode. And if you're not a member, please join. But just to cover some of the basics in there, Meir Kahane spent a good part of the 1960s operating in the shady world of DC Cold War right-wing think tanks and experiencing the glories of the American far right at the time, like the John Birch Society under the pseudonym of Michael King, as well as becoming an intelligence asset for American letter agencies, of course. This is something that, again, seems to be overlooked. Just that he was an informant, but not all this other stuff that he seemed to do for quite a few years. Not, it wasn't like a year or two. It was up until he founded the JDL in 1968, from like the early 1960s, like 60, 61. And of course, argue that this is crucial in understanding his later political development, because you can see all these elements from that time period reflected in all of his different philosophies and actions that he takes in the future. And then, of course, there's the whole fact that the JDL was most likely started as some sort of kind of COINTELPRO project. Whether it was directly a COINTELPRO project or not, he was deeply affiliated with intelligence agencies and continued to work for the FBI. And basically the objective was, to try to sap away support from campus radicalism and the growing anti-war movement. And we talked about how Kahane had tried and failed to develop an organization like this with his pal Joseph Chorba before he started the JDL, which is called the July 4th movement, and had the same kind of shady backers coming from the world of intelligence and some business and the like. But, trying to sap the energy away from campus radicalism was not exceptional for the time.
Yeah.
It was kind of pretty much everybody from the U.S. government to the U.S. American far right were trying to do the same thing, right? I mean, let's not forget that one of the most successful American neo-Nazi projects, the National Alliance, grew out of the National Youth Alliance, and in turn, the Youth for Wallace, which was, a Nazi campaign to get campus activists into the, campaign of segregationist George Wallace, and then into the Liberty Lobby. Eventually gets taken over by Jesus Christ.
William Pierce, yeah.
William Luther Pierce, yep.
Who was also at one point affiliated with the John Birch Society.
Who was also affiliated with the John Birch Society. Yeah. Right. I mean, this is pretty normal for the time. Also, exact same time period as this, right? This is I think Youth for Wallace is 1968 too, the year that the JDL is founded.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, this is all stuff that we've seen before, as we'll continue to see throughout this episode.
Yeah, in the first episode, you kind of established that Kahane is very much kind of a product of the American right wing, and probably inspired by pretty extreme parts of that right wing, like the Christian identity movement and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they fundamentally shaped his worldview and the worldview that's put forward by the JDL. Because, I mean, in this, we did talk about this, and just now with Richard Spencer, he had this experience of Gentile America, away from New York City. And they say New York City is not America, and it's not. He grew up there. He goes to Washington to be part of these, right-wing anti-communist lobbyist groups. He is kind of shocked by the outright anti-Semitism in in California and in the Southwest by high society people. He didn't expect it. I think, in his view, it was probably, rednecks and, Southern Klansmen who are actually racist and anti-Semites. And he has this experience that leads him to the conclusion that, no matter how much you agree on certain points, they'll inevitably find a way to blame the Jews for everything, and that the Holocaust ultimately isn't an aberration, but the norm, right? And I think, after after the last episode aired, I was going through some of our archives, and I found an interesting letter written by Robert Welch, of the founder of the John Birch Society, to General Pedro del Valle, American fascist, first Latinx general in the U.S. Army, but huge Nazi and anti-Semite,
friend of George Lincoln Rockwell.
Yeah.
We have an episode on him and his group.
Yeah, at least one, right? Do we have two?
Yeah,
one.
He had a group, something Constitution Defenders, something like that. It was his group name.
Yeah. So I found this letter that Robert Welch from the John Birch Society wrote to him, and it's interesting to me because the John Birch Society was officially not anti-Semitic, right? And Kahane reportedly gave information to the FBI about certain Birchers who he thought were anti-Semitic. But in this letter from 1959, Welch kind of clarifies his position on Jews. There's clearly a letter before this in which, Del Valle said some stuff about the Jews. And he says, I'll just read from it. I just found it was interesting. I thoroughly understand your attitude about the group referred to in your letter. To put the matter bluntly, too large a percentage of Jews are communists, and too large a percentage of communists are Jews. And the Jews among the leading communists have been able and willing to put pressure on the ordinary Jewish citizens of America to go along with the left-wing trend, far heavier than even similar pressures which are now being increasingly put on other races and groups in America to the same end. For this reason, I am careful in putting any dependence on even Jews who are good friends of mine in ideological matters, as even you could ask. But I can never accept any complete generalization with regard to them because too many exceptions within my personal knowledge. Because of the pressures involved from their own people, the Jews who are really fighting the communists frequently have to show more courage than even the rest of us. I think this is kind of maybe emblematic of what Kahane, or, Michael King, as he was going by then, might have encountered in the John Birch Society.
Yeah,
right?
Because this is supposedly the not anti-Semitic leader of the John Birch Society who says that he doesn't even trust his friends who were Jews.
Yes. But then he says, a number who showed this courage, who are excellent patriotic American citizens in every way.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think this is really important to his political development. This is the kind of things he was interacting with, in the John Birch Society in the early 1960s. And I think it led him to this ultimate conclusion that America is and always was and always will be fundamentally a white Christian nation. And he says actually this pretty explicitly in this famous interview he did in Playboy from, I'm going to get the year wrong, so I'm not going to say it. But it's either in the late it's after they found the JDL. So it's after 68. It might be 1970 or something like that. Doesn't really matter. But, in this interview, it's a kind of telling interview in a lot of ways. I think he lies about a lot of stuff because he does kind of lie about a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. But I think there are some truths there too. And he says, the black problem is simply that this is a white country. And the Jewish problem is that this is by its very nature a Christian country. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is something obviously that he just came to accept. And therefore, as somebody who wanted to be right wing, he saw that there wasn't much of a future in the broader American right. He kind of thought that he would never really actually be accepted there, especially if he was there as Meir Kahane, the rabbi, not Michael King, the, Gentile playboy, or whatever. And the Jewish right, in the form of revisionist Zionists, no longer had the teeth or the same draw in America, at least after the establishment of the State of Israel. So he decided to create something new and draw upon, obviously, the influences around him. And again, to quote him from that Playboy interview, the Talmud says, "Who is wise? He who learns from all people." You can kind of tell I've been going a little cuckoo here with Kahane.
He's obsessed with Kahane. Every night he goes to sleep with Kahane, wakes up in the morning with Kahane, has his coffee with Kahane.
And that's me. I'm having my coffee with Kahane. I did actually wake up this morning thinking about something from Kahane because I was reading the notes before I went to bed. So yeah, I mean, that's a little bit of a summary of right, what we talked about in the last episode and then some, right? So let's pick up where we left off there. So we left off with the July 4th movement, which is that failed campus group to get students to support the Vietnam War. Specifically, also, too many Jews were in the anti-war movement. They needed to do something about it. And so the JDL is founded in 1968. So typically in the narratives about the JDL or Kahane, the general revolutionary climate of 68 is what gets brought up, right? The riots, the assassination of MLK, the rising public militancy of the left. And what is often left out, and as I will keep repeating, is that this is also a very important point in the development of the American right. The post-war right, in its far right as we understand it now today, really comes out of the 1960s as well, right? The 50s have the John Birch Society, but the 60s is where you really start to get, this move towards militancy, whether it's in the form of like the nascent militia movement or the move towards like more lone wolf nihilistic terror. And, of course, the American Nazi Party and all that kind of stuff. This is all happening then, too. And, the general climate of the 60s definitely has an influence on all of this, right? These aren't separate worlds in some ways. There's a lot of interaction going on, and the right is borrowing certain things from the left and the like. But, it's interesting to me that it's talked about in that way because Kahane wasn't coming from like the acid dropping, 60s. He's coming from the suit and tie wearing, like Ballad of the Green Berets 60s, right? And he's a guy who went, he's a little older, right? He's born in the 30s. He graduated college in the 50s. He's an adult here in the 60s and somebody who was in the Washington lobby world. So like, yeah, he knows about, all that stuff that's going on. He's concerned about it, but he just spent like 8 years in the American like right wing like both the far right and the right wing establishment in DC. And that's, I think that's where he's drawing a lot of his influence from.
Yeah.
So the JDL was founded as a militant, street level self-defense organization. They have the slogan, never again. It was aimed at, protecting Jews from anti-Semitism and black crime, basically, in urban areas. Now, for the self-defense organization part, this is where people draw the resemblance to the Black Panther Party, right? Which was originally called the Black Panther Party for self-defense. But there's a crucial difference here, and that's that, obviously the Panthers were concerned with self-defense against the violence of the state, police brutality and the like, systemic violence, police violence. Whereas the JDL was primarily concerned with combating elements that destabilized the state and made black militancy and the left their primary target, especially in the early days. And this puts them way more in line with formulations of the American right, militant right at the time, such as the Minutemen, which, they are actually compared to sometimes in the 60s. People say, tactics like the Minutemen or the Black Panthers, or groups that like the now forgotten kind of American volunteer groups in California and the like, which Kahane would have been familiar with coming from his time in the Americanist right. Yeah. So, I actually did some digging too, because I was just curious how much of this kind of stuff overlaps. And I remembered some stuff about the American volunteer groups, because that, again, it's kind of forgotten about today, but this is, one of these kind of white nationalist, far right militias that had popped up in California in the 60s, who are also kind of a self-defense organization. So I just kind of want to read real quick the way that they kind of describe themselves.
Okay.
And see how that lines up with what the JDL kind of does, right? Mm-hmm. Our immediate goal is simply survival. Our long-range goal is to salvage a remnant of civilization so that it might blossom forth again some distant day as savagery and chaos descend around us. We step outside the boundaries of conventional resistance and harden our hearts for the deeds that lie ahead. So the AVG is further self-described as a national, this is from an FBI file, organization of patriotic and concerned Americans who are preparing themselves against revolution taking place on our campuses and streets. The AVG has declared that in such as it is apparent that our law enforcement agency cannot cope with revolution on the campuses, and have admitted that they can do little when the revolutionaries bring guerrilla warfare to our streets, cities, and homes. It has become necessary for the citizen to provide for his own protection, and organized AVG groups will blah, blah, blah. AVG says that, that they will organize neighborhood patrols against black militants and other revolutionary groups, right? Mm-hmm. This is exactly what the JDL does. Depending on the size of a particular neighborhood, these revolutionaries will drive down your street shooting and throwing firebombs. If little or no resistance is encountered, they will stop and invade some of the homes. The AVG has decided to do something about this. We have organized committees of public safety. These are not offensive units, but defensive units, et cetera, et cetera.
The first thing you read from them, it's kind of oddly very traditionalist sounding, like almost kind of Evolian. Like, we want to preserve the last remnants of a civilization, like in this decadent age, so it can flourish like in some far future, in a new golden age or something like that.
Yeah. I didn't think of it that way, but you're right. But I also read that part because, what Kahane is concerned with the most in the way he formulates the existence of the JDL is that it's about Jewish survival.
Yeah.
At all costs, right? By any means necessary. And that in this climate of chaos, right, the only thing that you can do is ensure survival through militant organization. And I think the crucial difference here between, American volunteer groups do have some sort of, and these right-wing militias do have some anti-government stuff, but ultimately they kind of see themselves as like an auxiliary to the state, right? Not necessarily combating it against it. And that's definitely kind of how Kahane sees himself, especially in the early days. Now, for a majority of American Jews at the time, these groups weren't really on anybody's radar in that sense. They weren't part of, the urban life of most, Jews, and people weren't paying attention to that. But again, guys like Kahane and Chorba were in a different milieu altogether. They were coming from a very different world, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of hardly surprising then that one of Kahane's first official acts as head of the JDL after it's founded, it might actually be the first official act where he goes, representing the JDL, is to go to Washington and testify at the House Committee on American Activities, where he presented the JDL as an organization to, quote, to defend Jewish people against anti-Semitism and defend this country against various extremist groups such as the communists and the black nationalists functioning at the present time. There's some stuff missing there, right?
Yeah.
But these are the enemies of the American state at the time. This is exactly what they want to hear. This is exactly what a right-wing militia should be doing, right?
Yeah.
And he continues to provide HUAC with information even later. I mean, by the time he moves to Israel, we're actually talking about a pretty short window of time here. So it starts in 1968, and Kahane leaves America in 1971. But a lot of stuff happens in between. But, by a lot of accounts, and former members of the JDL and stuff said that, there were HUAC guys coming to the JDL offices, the FBI, COINTELPRO specifically. I talked about this in the last episode. They had that whole file on, Kahane and how they could stoke, the JDL against the Black Panthers by sending Kahane like anti-Semitic letters supposedly from black militants, which would then inspire the JDL to take action against the Black Panther Party and the like. He knowingly published FBI COINTELPRO stuff in the Jewish press. And we'll get to that in a sec. Because Kahane was smart, very smart about organization and marketing. And of course, it does help to have, a team of professionals with you. So out of the founders of the JDL alongside Kahane were a couple other guys. Chorba was apparently part of the original founding too, even though he's not typically understood. He distanced himself from the JDL later, even though I guess he never cut off ties with Kahane, as long as they were both alive. But, they had a couple other, guys from kind of weird backgrounds, connected in some ways, either to intelligence or to kind of the business community, the kind of people that would fund a militia like that or, take part in it. And so it isn't to say that, anti-Semitism, racial tensions in 1968 weren't very high in everywhere in the country and in all these neighborhoods in New York. And I mean, even today, like in Brooklyn and Crown Heights, there's, been a long-standing history of animosity between Black and Jewish people there. I mean, this is not like a particularly new thing, but, this is also the period of when many Jews are moving up into the middle classes, upper middle classes, moving to the suburbs, but still leaving large urban populations behind that tend to be, more working class or poorer. And this is something Kahane taps into extremely well, even though he comes kind of from this upper middle class New York, Brooklyn rabbinic family who's never, never wanted for anything. He does have this ability to kind of speak to working class Jews in New York. So maybe this would be a good point to play the third clip.
In this country, there are Jewish poor. Many, many Jewish poor. We can find them in Brownsville, and we can find them in the Southeast Bronx, and we can find them in the Lower East Side, and in all the pockets of Jewish poverty that exist in every urban area of this country. And who knows of the Jewish poor? And who thinks of them? And who cares? We're too busy fighting the problems and the battles of every other group in the world. But who cares about the fact that there are elderly people and poor people in neighborhoods that are Jews? Who cares about the fact that they live in crime-ridden areas, areas of nightmares of violence? Who thinks of them? Once again, who killed Ahavat Yisrael, the love of a Jew, for a second Jew?
So, I mean, this is kind of the crux of his, this is from, his period as head of the JDL. I think it's from 1970.
So specifically, the Jews care about everyone else except the Jews.
Yes, that's his main argument. This is the biggest problem, is that Jews don't put Jews first. Jews in America, according to him, are too left-wing, right? Too liberal, too left-wing. They care about every single other cause, like, the civil rights for black people, but nobody is looking out for, putting Jews first. And this is what the JDL is supposed to do. That's their main thing.
Yeah.
And you can see, I mean, okay, this was kind of one of his less animated talks, right? But you get kind of who he's going for, right? And of course, like, it's important to look at who the JDL targeted and who they didn't, right? So Kahane tries to walk this delicate line between saying, he's saying that there are these social problems, there's a lot of Jewish poor, but it's kind of Jews' fault. There's nothing, it's Jews' fault for kind of moving to the suburbs and not caring about the other Jew. That's part of this, part of the JDL's, its first principle is that phrase that he said at the end, Ahavat Yisrael, which is the love of Jewry. And so this is from their handbook. The Jewish people, wherever they may be, each Jewish individual, wherever he is, wherever his belief, whatever his belief, whatever his place of residence, whatever color of his skin, whatever language he temporarily speaks, all Jews are part of one great body, Israel. We are all brothers, we are all sisters, and the love of a brother to a brother and a sister to a sister is the love of a Jew for one another. This is the first of the principles of the Jewish defense movement. So he's trying to walk this fine line between saying, like, okay, there are these social problems. I recognize these social problems. I'm speaking for, the downtrodden that nobody's, cares about, which, is interesting because, the American Jews on the left have a very long tradition of exactly that, caring for the urban poor and organizing on, like, labor movements and whatever, but that to him is anti-Semitic too, because it's not religious, it's not Jewish.
Yeah.
Those are alien ideas. Right.
Well, I mean, that's also like what was specific about fascism was they were like, using these kind of leftist rhetorics to talk about the poor, but in their own specific national group and not in some kind of internationalist way.
Right.
Kind of. Yeah.
Right. And also with having, like, our national group is partially, we are responsible for our own position. Right. Like, there are external factors, right? But, like, the fact that we have too many communists is making this a problem.
Yeah.
But it's interesting then with this attitude towards America, right? Because, he does say in some interviews, America's been uniquely great for the Jewish people. It's helped the Jewish people develop a lot in ways that they couldn't elsewhere or can't. In, like, the Soviet Union is one of his big things.
And why does he explain that? Why is America like that? Why is America good to the Jews?
Because it has this democratic system that allowed, Jews to exist kind of in their own world, even though that's not good enough, because it's also ultimately, like, destroying. This is something that he really develops later on after he moves to Israel, when he becomes much more critical of Jews in the diaspora in general and wants them to all move to Israel. Because he ultimately later says, no matter what, no matter how much you think you're living your religious life or whatever, if you live in the galut, if you live in the diaspora, you are inevitably going to be influenced by the majority culture around you. There's nothing you can do about it except for go to a place where Jews are majority, and then you can live a Jewish life, which in his view is like has to be a theocracy.
Yeah.
But he believes that, like, democracy is great for the United States. I mean, that's what the white Christian country was founded as, and that's how it should be. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's fine for white Christians. They'll be fine, and that's a good system that works for them. It's worked for Jews too, but now it's time to leave, and because they have Israel. But it is always this. It's really a kind of contradictory point that he makes, because in all of these interviews and I think even in this from the same speech where this clip came from that we just played, he frequently talks a lot about like how despite all of that, America still like FDR did not take Jewish refugees. He rejected ships of Jewish refugees at the beginning of World War II, and they knew about the death camps early in the war and did nothing to stop it. And this is kind of playing at this antagonism, right? That like, yes, it's been good, but ultimately you see these are these things, they don't really care about us. But then, why not treat it as a systemic issue, right? Like if this is the case, then your enemy is the WASP too. It's WASP. It's the U.S. government. I mean, Nixon was a huge anti-Semite.
Yeah.
He's in this time period. Why is then your enemy the black anti-Semitism, right? Why is that the target?
He's he's viewed that like he supports democracy in the U.S., but he wants Israel to be a theocracy. He's kind of compatible with a lot of like American fascist views.
Absolutely, 100%
of American democracy, like we talked about before, like Ezra Pound and some others who they had this kind of way of thinking, like, okay, fascism, that's good for Italy, but in the US we have like constitution, and like that's some kind of a Anglo-Saxon racial way of organizing that's good for us but not for others.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think he's taken that.
Yeah.
100%. Now, why does he think that a theocracy is better for Jews? Well, that's what the Torah says.
Yeah.
That is, and we'll talk more about this in the next episode that we do, but he really develops these ideas further after he kind of moves away from the JDL and after he moves from the US. But at this point, it's always kind of, going on this fine line of kind of hinting that, well, okay, America's okay. We want to be good, patriotic Americans. We appreciate what America's done. We want to help the federal government combat the communists. His whole argument for supporting the Vietnam War, and that we talked about in the last episode, is that it, fighting communism globally helps Jews because the anti-colonial movements and like the Arab, the Palestinian liberation movement is part of this global phenomenon that's part of global communism. And so if it's, defeated in one end of the world, it will be defeated in the other end of the world. So Israel will benefit from, Vietnam not falling to the communists and stuff. And this, again, 100% this worldview that comes out of that American anti-communist, lobby think tank world of the early 1960s, the 1950s and 1960s. So he's really trying to figure it out, I think, at this time. He says at one point, like, the American dream is one worth saving in like a JDL text.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like early JDL. By the time he's out of there, like a few years later, he's like, nope, we all got to go to Israel.
Okay.
He even says we all got to go to Israel at this time too, but he's more kind of pro-American. But yeah, we'll save that for the next episode. So yeah, I mean, with all of this kind of even this kind of lukewarm systemic critique of America, his enemies are ultimately, in the beginning, black people and like outright literal Nazis, right?
Black people are the enemy for like kind of purely kind of American racist reasons, or are there like in some kind of is there like a larger ideology that justifies why they're the enemy?
I mean, I think that in terms of black anti-Semitism is real. It exists, and it manifests itself in real ways. Like some
are
of the
they
stuff
more enemies because he thinks they're anti-Semites or because they're criminals?
Both.
Okay.
He's against like these kind of black militant or radical movements because even the ones that aren't anti-Semitic, right? Like he hates, for example, black Hebrew Israelites, and he even fucks with them when he goes to Israel too. but like, he doesn't like any kind of black militancy or black radicalism because if it's influenced from, communism or something like that, communism is inherently anti-Semitic because it's anti-religious. If it's anti-religious, it will, its ultimate goal is wiping out Jews as they exist as a people from God. But then so some of this is a mix of him not liking, like the Panthers for whatever, they're being like a Marxist Leninist organization.
Yeah.
But also kind of dated, like some of the stuff. So, the group kind of coalesced initially around 1968 Ocean Hill Brownsville teachers strike, which came about as a result of some changes that were made in New York public schools, kind of giving more, administrative rights in communities with, black majority or, black or Latino majorities. So basically this school district was like 90% black and the teachers were like 80% white or 90% white. And a good percentage of that was Jewish. So a lot of these teachers were like reassigned, there's a strike, blah, blah, blah. Kahane described that as a battle for black Nazism in Brownsville. Okay. And, there were some instances of kind of anti-Semitic, like properly anti-Semitic statements, supposedly. But, this is not surprising either. I mean, black Muslims had plenty of anti-Semitic, Nation of Islam had, plenty of bad things to say about Jews. It's not like that wasn't real, but, it's any kind of manifestation, anything that will maybe harm Jewish people's occupations, even, it doesn't really matter what's going on, is something that they react to and something that they will call like Nazism, basically. Yeah. And Kahane even says when they critique when, black radicals say that, Jews own, that they're Jewish slumlords in the ghetto. He's like, yeah, slumlords are real. I don't support slumlords, right? But I support Jewish people. Yeah. And so attacking them is not okay. So yeah, I mean, this is the kind of the very first actions of the JDL are kind of focused around the schools, right? And one of their first protests, their first demo is on NYU campus, again, protesting the hiring of a guy in the Afro-American Student Center for his alleged anti-Semitism. And this is kind of the early stuff that they're doing. And, he's successfully playing on these class issues, right? Criticizing the suburban Jews, the assimilated Jews for not caring about what's going on in the cities, because the Jews that are left in the cities are living, alongside or surrounded by Black and Puerto Rican communities, and nobody cares. As he said in that clip, right? Who cares about them? It's.
I mean, the society generally doesn't care about poor people. I mean, no.
Yeah. Well, okay, Ray. Your communist thought here. Yeah. But, really where the JDL starts to surge in popularity is when they, make more of a street presence. So this is all the school stuff is okay. It's getting them attention and stuff. But, they really start making the headlines with, being on the streets, right? They have a slogan along with Never Again is for every Jew a 22. Now, I think he even says in an interview somewhere that it's a 22 because it rhymes. It's it's not a particularly good caliber.
Is it maybe it's inspired by Son of Sam?
Oh,
I mean, I'm kidding, but wasn't he the 22 caliber killer?
Oh, okay, there you go.
Yeah. And it was Jewish.
Secret Son of Sam JDL connection. So, the JDL, with the slogan, militant slogan, and again, people draw comparisons to the Panthers. Sure.
No, sorry. He was the 44 caliber killer.
There you go. You see, that's a more reasonable caliber.
Yeah.
22 is a plinker there. You're just gonna, the hard-headed guy could easily survive that. What was I saying? Oh yeah, but I mean, you also see slogans like this in the militia movement too, right? Like, it was a little later, but like Posse Comitatus has like, guns for every American and this kind of thing. I mean, it's America. This is not a controversial, not a very unusual statement. So they establish training camps in the Catskills where, young men are trained in firearms, handling firearms, martial arts, making Molotov cocktails, later explosives, things like that. Often by former members of the Irgun, right? Mm-hmm. That we talked about in episode 1. Irgun, the revisionist Zionist kind of terrorist militia that was active in, fighting the British initially. And then, did some exceptional massacres in 1947, 48. So Jabotinsky's militia, right? So he's again drawing on that experience. And, they have Irgun IDF guys training them. They have an elite unit of guys called chayas, or animals in Hebrew. Mm-hmm. And they're like the roughest of the rough, and they get like a particularly notorious reputation. Even though ultimately, and this is again where it comes down to marketing, the JDL had, they spread outside of New York, and, they end up in a lot of major American cities. But even New York, they have a bigger reputation, or like a tougher reputation than is actually reflected in their like actual street presence and how many of them there are. So, what they start doing is that they organize, right, patrols of Jewish neighborhoods, particularly ones that are, close to non-white neighborhoods. Meanwhile, Kahane is using his position as, he was a journalist still in the Jewish press, which is a very big Jewish newspaper, wide circulation, a job that he would actually later soon lose for political reasons after, some members of the Jewish establishment were like, you can't have this guy here anymore. This is when they're doing kind of more violence, right? But, he's publishing nonstop articles about, Black and Latino crime, kind of pumping up this hysteria around crime, criminality. And then, of course, the JDL is a solution to this. And like I said, he's also pushing out like this COINTELPRO stuff sent to him by the FBI, right? These supposed letters from Black militants that are anti-Semitic and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So they have like trucks that they drive around with loudspeakers that are, warning off blacks from coming into Jewish neighborhoods and stuff. I mean, this is like racist shit. This is fucking Bob Dylan was into this. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This is like, like again, well, so, they're doing kind of everything from being in like these street fights, fighting kids off. Like, there's some examples that I've read, or like, on, whatever, Halloween, kids would go into this Jewish cemetery and vandalize it. And, the kids hop the fence and there's a bunch of JDL guys there with bats who beat the shit out of them. They're, walking like old people to synagogue and stuff like that. Strong arming, like at the school boards and then even doing shit like, firebombing a Black community center in Crown Heights, which was allegedly a response to some Jewish center that got burned down, although it wasn't established by whom, but whatever. Famously, they had a huge brawl in front of the Black Panther Party's New York headquarters in Harlem, where like a truckload of JDL dudes with Kahane out there with a loudspeaker, screaming, go out there and brawl with bats and chains with Black Panthers. So like, this is like, rough, like street fighting stuff, right?
Yeah.
But it's not like what it's going to become pretty soon. They are doing like fun stuff, like beating up National Renaissance Party guys.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
remember
you talked about that, Ray.
They were really terrorizing them, I think.
Which is, that's fine.
Yeah.
They famously, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, National Renaissance Party was specifically like a New York City based group. So I guess that was kind of something that they felt they needed to do, and they were like these kind of AMP inspired or like related people who were basically LARPing as brown shirts. So how can you not beat them up? I guess.
Yeah, I mean that's,
Yeah.
and they were kind of dweebs, no? Like,
Yeah.
they're probably easy to beat the shit out of.
Yes.
They beat the absolute fuck out of the American Nazi Party at one of their events, I think in like 1970. Like rolled in with like bats and chains, like left a bunch of dudes like these chayas or whatever, just beat the fuck out of them. Which I'm fine with.
Of course, one of the guys who was both in ANP and the National Renaissance Party, specifically for a time, I think in New York City, was the
Dan Burroughs.
Dan Burroughs, yeah, which who was like
who was Jewish.
So I think that probably was very like I can imagine people from the JDL thinking about that and kind of confirming the whole self-hating Jew thing to them.
They probably didn't. I mean, Burroughs wasn't outed until, when did Burroughs kill himself? What year was that?
I don't know. I mean,
I wonder if he was still around then.
It was so Rockwell was still alive because he had a press conference. Yeah.
To those of you who don't know, Dan Burroughs was a member of the National Renaissance Party, the American Nazi Party, and then the Klan, who was Jewish but hid it from everybody.
Yeah, he died in 1965. Yeah.
Okay, so he wasn't around for this.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay.
That's too bad for. I mean, this would have been kind of funny. Actually, Sal, this is a good time to play the one thing that I agree a lot with Kahane.
That was a great error, and I say it again. You don't ignore Nazis, nor do you pick at them and thus give them all that tremendous coverage. You quietly send your pros in, and you make sure that they can't walk. That's how they don't march.
They don't march because they can't walk.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm with him there, but everything else is kind of fucked.
Yeah.
And this is also where like things get confusing for people too, right? And this is like you'd see this when Nazis come to town, and there's JDL people come and like anti-racists come and anti-fascists come. They end up kind of often in these like awkward situations because they have the same enemy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is Nazis. So all of this was remarkably successful in attracting young men, and this is pretty much male organization. I'm not actually sure if they ever had like a women's wing or something like that, which some groups did. I don't think they did. And and I think Friedman's book, he quotes one of these JDL guys as saying that they had what he described as Italian Jews, not that they're Italian, but that they're like dudes from Canarsie who wore wife beaters and like like gold chains and shit. And then also doing what they were put there to do initially by the feds, which was attract formerly leftist students from the anti-war movement, from the student movement, which were attracted to the JDL because of these kind of successful deployment of kind of 1960s identity politics, right? Ethnic identity politics, Jewish pride, have pride in being a Jew, and also there's Shaul Magid talks about it in his book a lot. There were elements of like the Jewish New Left who were beginning to be alienated by like the anti-Zionism of like third worldism and the like, which they, perceived as anti-Semitic or whatever. And so there was kind of some alienation among the Jewish left. He said something in his book that I'd never heard of before. Do you know that a couple SDS chapters grew out of a labor Zionist group?
No.
I didn't know that either. I'm gonna have to follow up on that.
But I mean, SDS. I don't know much about SDS, but like from what I read here and there, they were almost kind of a confederation of very autonomous groups.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised that something like that existed, because like the Weathermen were like a chapter of the SDS. Even the anarchist group up against the wall motherfuckers were also a chapter of the SDS. So I guess there was all kinds of people and groups there.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this is ultimately it is becoming successful in what it aimed to do, right? This is also when Bob Dylan like goes to a couple meetings and is like, oh, this is kind of cool. There's these famous interactions. I think, what is it? Famously, Abby Hoffman told Kahane, I think they it might have been on like they were on a panel or a show together or something. And Hoffman told him, I disagree. I agree with your methods. I hate your politics.
Kind of like you,
Which
I
is-
guess.
Yeah. Hey, me and Abby Hoffman. And then of course, so yeah, it is getting some people from the left. And there's a big fact that is, worth noting, and that's that a lot of these kids that are joining the JDL at this time are children of Holocaust survivors. Right. I mean, this is something that is a big part of a lot of these people's lives in some way or another. Right. And so the message never again definitely resonates with them. Even the opening of the Principles and Philosophy of the Jewish Defense League starts with, we are a generation that lives in the memory of the shadow of the 6 million. The destruction of 1/3 of our people, the Holocaust that occurred such a brief while ago, is a great trauma for us, a blow that irrevocably, I can never say that word properly, influences our lives and our thinking. The Holocaust was an unbelievably horrifying climax to century after century of persecution. It surpassed all other horrors, all of the Inquisitions, the Crusades, the pogroms, and the slaughters. Can one really imagine losing fully 1/3 of his people and the finest and the most vital part of that? And then, it goes on and on. But, obviously this is a central part of their philosophy and a central part of the appeal too, for people who might be, they had people that were Holocaust survivors in the group, and not such a small number. Right. There is also, again, this marketing aspect to it that like is getting them more prominence. Kahane takes out this ad, and there's a newspaper thing that, it says, is this any way for nice Jewish boys to behave? And it's a picture of a bunch of guys with baseball bats. Again, he has this obsession with being perceived as strong and powerful. This is something that like he almost internalizes like the worst anti-Semitic stereotypes, right?
Yeah.
Like
I was just thinking, if Dan Burroughs lived a few years, maybe he would join the JDL.
Yeah, I mean, they might not have taken him after being an ANP member, but like if he had maybe hidden that part,
if they came up with a good story, I think they would like to have someone like him.
Yeah, probably. No, but I mean, like, Kahane's constant just repetition of, that we have to be tough, we can't be fucked with, like, messed with, nobody, we're not gonna go like sheep to the camps and stuff.
Yeah.
It's interesting because they take, right, Never Again from the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, but like, what about like the like million Jews that served in the Red Army or something?
Yes, for example.
Or like there's partisans and stuff like that. They weren't, weaklings that were being killed so easily. It's a very strange kind of issue he has.
Or like even the anarchists, the Jewish anarchists you mentioned who assassinated their like
Petlura.
Yeah.
Who made an alliance with Jabotinsky, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he conveniently leaves out a lot of stuff often, all the time. Later, the JDL, I'm going to mention it now, they form an alliance with the Colombo family and the Italian-American Anti-Defamation League. Is that what it is?
I guess so.
Yeah, that was formed by the Colombos in 1967. So he actually develops a close relationship with Joe Colombo. And I kind of wonder if this, I've never seen anybody mention this, but, he had that relationship with Jay Lovestone, the former Union guys who the CIA sent to post-war France and Italy.
The guy who had
alliances,
connection with Angleton, right?
Yeah, the guy who worked under Angleton, who, specifically worked with the mafia to break up, communist labor unions in France and in Italy. Like he was Jay Lovestone, like supported the July 4th movement, and like he had that connection there. I wonder if he kind of instinctually went to the mafia, kind of drawing on that experience. But this kind of worked out for them in a few different ways. One, the Colombos helped them financially in some ways, like when Kahane goes to prison, Joe Colombo bails him out. But they work together for smuggling weapons. because the JDL increasingly needs weapons when they start moving towards bombings and the like. And then, of course, JDL guys, serve as kind of enforcers they do work for the Colombos from time to time. And the JDL kind of, as it develops later on, kind of becomes more of like just a criminal organization.
Okay.
So
what kind of crime?
Later, like in the 90s, I think like under Irv Rubin, they're implicated in like running rackets on like fucking Tupac and shit. Like there's all kinds of crazy shit that happens with the JDL later. That'll be in the next episode.
Also, they're the mob. Yeah.
They become kind of the mob. Yeah. But so Kahane has all this newfound attention, and he is actually kind of pulling in money. There are people that are donating money. People are saying that Kahane pocketed a lot of that. Like there wasn't.
Do you know if they ever had any kind of connection with like the older kind of Jewish gangsters who were connected with the mob?
I don't know. I know that modern kind of JDL people venerate those guys a lot. I'm not sure if they had that connection. I presume that if they did, they wouldn't have necessarily gone with the Colombos, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the heyday of the Jewish mob was over.
Yeah. But they were close.
The
Jewish gangsters were closely associated with
the Italian.
Yeah. But I don't know. Like I don't know if it depends on what family and so on. But some of those guys were also like fighting the Nazis, like in the 30s, something like that.
Yeah. So basically, just despite all this attention and whatever, just almost a year after its founding, the JDL starts to take a turn away from simply street level organization to being the militant wing of the movement for Soviet Jewry. Advocacy for Jews in the Soviet Union was a well-established, I guess, phenomenon around the world. In the U.S., it was most prominently represented by the Student Struggle for Soviet Jewry, which was established by Jacob Birnbaum in 1964, which is kind of the student nonviolent movement for Soviet Jews. The Israeli government's obviously quite involved in this movement. They want more people in Israel, for their demographic obsession and problem. Various groups have different focuses, but ultimately, one of the primary goal was to push the USSR to allow Soviet Jews to emigrate to Israel or the United States. Now, again, in many books on Kahane and the JDL, this turn is seen as kind of a surprising, interesting move, an outlier from the kind of street level organization the JDL previously been involved with. But, to me, and if you're familiar with this show, the JDL's actions against the Soviets and also the PLO completely fits the mold of other emigre anti-communist militant organizations that we've talked a ton about on our show, right? So I don't know. Do we need to give a quick overview of that? I mean, for new listeners.
What are you thinking about specifically?
Well, the entire phenomenon. Okay, so after World War II, lots of fascist collaborators, primarily fascist collaborator groups, were assisted by Western intelligence agencies to reestablish themselves as ways of combating the communism in the Soviet Union. These would be organized. Sometimes, they would be allowed to settle in Western countries and organize themselves. Sometimes they would enjoy quite a lot of support from the CIA, British intelligence, Canadian intelligence. And so we're talking about, everything from Ukrainian, Belarusian emigre groups, Ustasha Croats, Serbs. Oftentimes this would also have a dual benefit in that, they'd allowed large numbers of them to settle in their countries and then also kind of counter some of the leftist influence that their older emigre communities had. And these groups, famously, we talked a lot about the anti-Bolshevik Bloc of Nations that was organized by the Ukrainian Organization of Nationalists, Yaroslav Stetsko, that kind of encompassed a lot of different, mostly Eastern European groups. And we talked a lot about Chetniks and Ustashas who did all of the stuff that the JDL is going to do now. So like targeting Yugoslav diplomatic facilities, assassinations, bombings of whatever, tourist group, whatever, anything that's promoting economic trade with the communist countries, disrupted hijacking airplanes,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Like anti-communism terrorism. Yeah. Anti-communist
Yes.
terrorism. Yeah.
Yes. We have a lot of episodes on that. So if you're a new listener,
Yeah.
there's plenty to work on there. And what exactly motivated Kahane to make the turn is not clear. Robert Friedman in his book suggests that it was due to kind of a direct intervention by the Mossad and members of the Israeli far right, like the Tahia Party. Gilad Cohen had meetings with him in 1969 and proposed this kind of switch of focus to the Soviet Jews.
Did they ever assassinate anyone from the Eastern Bloc?
No. No, they came close. Like with a lot of these groups, they tend to kill like innocent people.
Sure.
By accident, it gets a little bit, that'll be in the next episode because that's later. But no. So, but I will just say also that Kahane had previously talked about the plight of Soviet Jews. It wasn't something that he just like including in his HUAC testimony. Like this isn't something that whatever he switched overnight because, he met with somebody from Israel and they told him to do it. Like this is something he had been focused on for a while. He made either a strategic decision himself or was kind of offered this like, money to do it for some reason or another. But, coming from the milieu of the anti-communist lobbying world of DC definitely made Kahane familiar with these kinds of groups. Kahane's writes in his book, and They Must Go, he writes, shows that he has a pretty extensive knowledge of like Ustashama terrorism. Like he knows all about the different things that they did. He's not like a super intellectual guy, but he's like a voracious reader. He reads a lot of, like he knows a lot of current events and stuff like that. And of course, while these groups are composed of mostly European fascists who killed Jews, and it'd be bad taste to associate that with them, there were actually attempts to do that kind of thing before. Like we remember we talked about way back when we talked about the World Anti-Communist League, Marvin Liebman, who was a Jewish CIA ex-communist turned Cold Warrior, who's about 10 years older than Kahane, who was operating with the Asian People's Anti-Communist League in Saigon and took part in the Mexico City conference where they laid the groundwork for the founding of the World Anti-Communist League. We have some episodes on that too. But the short story is that he dropped out then because he didn't like working with, guys like Yaroslav Stetsko who helped do the Holocaust.
Sure.
So Liebman and Chorba, Joseph Chorba, who we talked about in the last episode, ran in the same circles. I would not actually be surprised if they knew each other, honestly. And whether, Liebman's experience somehow factored in here in some way or another. As the World Anti-Communist League is, all of these Asian anti-communist governments, Latin American anti-communists, and then the anti-Bolshevik bloc of nations. It's really like the super group of the Cold War. We know that Chorba would later be associated with some other kind of wacko affiliates. It's weird. It's a difficult world to go through. I mean, these are some connections I've been drawing just because it's so obvious to me. And like when I read to you what they do, you'll be like, oh, this sounds like Sopo or like, Ustasha shit.
Like post-war,
like terrorism. Post-war, yeah. Post-war terror. Yeah. Liebman actually was a close associate of William F. Buckley. And also later became like a Republican gay activist.
Okay.
And actually, wait, while we're at Buckley, maybe this would be a nice time to kick back and relax.
Buckley, who was affiliated with the CIA, so very much a part of this kind of anti-communist effort. Yeah.
I think now would be a good time just to listen to, so this is 1970, when this interview comes out, I'm going to play, it's from the Dick Cavett Show, 1962. It's 1972. It's William F. Buckley, Meir Kahane, and some third rabbi who like disagrees with Kahane. And let's just play it because, Buckley's featured on our show. We can kick back and relax for a second, then get into what kind of anti-Soviet activities they did.
Well, my next guest is famous for his many things, his urbane charm, his intellect, his caustic sense of humor, He's also a great debater, columnist, colorful commentator at political conventions. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. William F. Buckley. We watching, we're in the middle of a subject that it's sort of hard to change. Would you like to join in here in any way? What you've been...
You always looked like you just got up.
Join in about what?
Well, we're talking about the... talking about the Jewish Defense League, the justifications for violence, violence used against violence, violence to prevent violence. Any thoughts you have on the subject would be welcome and interesting and well expressed, I'm sure.
Well, I don't believe in civil disobedience. On the other hand, I sympathize with Rabbi Kahane to the extent of what I understand to be the emotional texture of his analysis, namely that a lot of people who spend no time at all deploring the systematic inhumanity of the Soviet Union find episodic violence by those who oppose the Soviet Union to be insufferable. I think as a matter of civil law, he is wrong. I think if he is caught at it, he should be arrested and stuck in jail. But at the same time, I think that as far as history is concerned, he may very well be making the salient point, which is the people that we nowadays drinking champagne with are engaged in what Henry Camm of the New York Times called once a few months ago the worst assault on the human spirit in the history of mankind. So in that sense, I'm in sympathy with him.
Meaning what?
Meaning Russia.
Oh, Russian,
Yeah.
But how about, there's a premise there that's kind of faulty. How about people who spend a great deal of time and effort not only deploring but fighting
This part's not so
the
important, but-
Russian attempts and Soviet attempts at genocide and
People-
cultural genocide
people
is
like
no
you
longer...
and me.
I hope so.
I
and who
absolve us.
also deplore acts of violence in this country.
Yeah, I think you're quite right. Absolve us.
William F. Buckley has a knack of making you his ally.
I think on this point, this is a very, very vital point. I think in our day and age, when we're so busily building bridges to Moscow and everywhere else east, the whole concept of being anti-communist has become a very bad thing. Well, I put it to you, I have 4 children that I would like to see raised as good, observant, practicing Jews. If they were ever to fall under the kind of a regime that now rules Moscow, they could not be the kinds of Jews that I would like them to be. And I put it to you, therefore, that this is at least as great a danger to the survival of the Jewish people as an Adolf Hitler was. And it's about time that we Jews began to realize that a détente at the expense of the spirit of people, not just Jews, Catholics, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Protestants, is not a détente, it's Munich.
Jews?
Pardon?
You mean capitalists as
I said
distinguished from Jews?
Catholics.
Oh, Catholics.
Yes.
Oh, God.
They're not synonymous.
There are
I like how William...
there are some Catholics that are not capitalists.
All right, we can stop there. I like how William F. Buckley just said like an anti-Semitic thing there, like by accident. Yeah, but, I mean, this is an interesting clip to me, just because we've talked about Buckley a lot, right? And he's saying, "Oh, I'm not against, I'm against civil disobedience." And so, like, this is in 1972. This is after Kahane moved to Israel and came back, and this is after they had gone on like extensive bombing campaigns and killed a lady, like an innocent woman who worked at one of these offices. So, I mean, this is kind of quite remarkable to me. And then, Kahane's just sitting there and be like, we have to get back to the principles of anti-communism. It doesn't mean anything anymore. Like, you can see this like real, that old school kind of Cold Warrior coming out in him right there,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, like, these activities against the USSR start in 1969. The JDL does things like muscle their way into the offices of TASS, the Soviet press agency, Aeroflot, their airline, the Soviet tourist agency. The JDL guys riot outside of the Soviet consulate in New York, and then they begin to escalate their violence. So, they target things like Soviet diplomatic facilities and staff, like they follow them around New York, threaten them. At one point, they fire a rifle into the house, I think into the apartment of like a Soviet diplomat. But it then goes, even more into these campaigns of just bombing and the very kind of traditional, I'm going to read something real quick from Robert Friedman's book, just because he has a kind of good summary of just some of the bombings in 1970 and 71. November 23rd, 1970s, bombs exploded in front of Aeroflot and Infotourist office in New York. January 1971, bomb explodes outside of the Soviet Cultural Building on 18th Street in downtown Washington. Windows were shattered, blah, blah, blah. News agencies received a call that stated, "This is a sample of things to come. Let our people go, never again." January 1971, JDL members begin to follow Soviet officials and their family members in New York and Washington, spitting and shouting at them. The same week, 3 Soviet diplomats' cars were destroyed in firebombs. March 1971, bomb explodes outside the New York Communist Party headquarters. April 1971, bomb explodes outside of Amtorg, the Soviet Trade Center at 355 Lexington Avenue in Manhattan, gutting the 19th floor of the building. Sappers dismantled a second bomb, which nearly exploded while the New York chief of detectives and other officials were looking on. June 1971, bomb was found in the official Soviet residence at Glen Cove, New York. Explosive was safely dismantled. December 1971, a bomb exploded outside of Fifth Avenue gift shop in Manhattan, specializing in Soviet goods. A store in Minnesota that sold Russian gifts was destroyed by a bomb. In Europe, meanwhile, JDL sent letter bombs to Soviet embassies, blew up a Soviet container ship in a Dutch harbor, and plastered London with thousands of flyers reading, "If you want a full body massage, call Sonia," and listed the number of the Soviet embassy. This is, just a sample of their activities. One of their actual, I saw one that I just need to find it. They had a plan that they foiled that was to fly a remote control airplane packed with explosives into like a Soviet building, which is like, man, these guys, these like emigre terrorist guys in the 60s and 70s were really pioneering the whole flying planes into things. Reminds me of, Sopo with the plan to hijack a plane and fly it into the Yugoslav Communist Party headquarters.
Yeah.
This is what they're doing, right? They're also doing like less violent but disruptive things like, the Bolshoi theaters on, tour in the US, and they throw stink bombs in the halls and, make a scene. But this then starts to kind of escalate even further. They had been harassing this guy, Saul Hurok, for some time, who was a Jewish businessman, basically a guy who booked Soviet acts in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
The JDL had threatened him before in 1970 and like attacked his offices. Obviously, they had done all this activity against Soviet cultural tours and the like. But in 1972, they place a bomb in his office that detonates and ends up killing this one of his employees, a young Jewish woman named Iris Konis. After all of these explosions in 1971, the heat was really on Kahane. The FBI raids the JDL. Kahane gets arrested. Like I said, Joe Colombo bails him out of prison, bails him out of jail. And pretty soon thereafter, so he gets arrested in May, and by August, Kahane's going to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
He's out of there. And the last person he visits is Joe Colombo in the hospital after he got shot, right on his way out to Israel. He goes with some other JDL guys, but for Kahane, he left because the heat was on, basically. But he does actually go back to serve his sentence in the U.S. later.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll get into that next time. I will also mention that along with attacking Soviet facilities at the time, they also end up doing hitting PLO targets, Palestine Liberation Organization targets in New York with bombs, invading their offices, beating the shit out of people. I think they ended up, when they raided their offices, they got a bunch of documents and gave them to the Mossad or whatever. So yeah, I mean, this is kind of a funny thing to me with that William F. Buckley interview there, because he's saying he's against violence, and if they catch him, he goes to he should go to jail. But if you didn't know what was going on, you'd think it was civil disobedience, right?
Yeah.
Because Kahane was doing civil disobedience too. In 71, before he leaves, he takes part in a very successful peaceful march.
No, but this is terrorism by any kind of definition. What they do, no?
Yeah, absolutely. And just he does this big peaceful march with the SSSJ in DC that draws thousands of people for Soviet Jewry, and 1,000 people or so get arrested, and that's bolstering his image a little bit. But then also they kill this innocent woman. They're bombing a lot, even for 1970s standards. There's a lot of bombing going on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this is there are others I didn't mention too, and some that they catch and diffuse. And it reminds me a lot of, like I said, these emigre terrorist groups at the time who are doing almost exactly the same thing, attacking these cultural institutions and the like, and then also using a very kind of contemporary anti-colonial language and talking about democratic rights for people. So a guy like Zvonko Bušić, who we talked about, famous Croatian, Ustaša emigre terrorist who probably killed 11 people in New York in that one bombing. Grand Central Station, but was in prison for 30 years because of a bomb that went off at JFK that killed an NYPD officer. His writings at the time, he's talking about he's using this language of kind of UN humanitarian liberation against imperialism, Yugoslav imperialism against Croatia, and this is also like I said before, how Kahane is kind of marketing himself to young people as well. So Sal, can you play the previous clip that we didn't play earlier? Because I do think it's interesting to hear how he frames things.
We are in a struggle for the soul of the young Jew, and of course it is a struggle for the future of Jews in this country. And we make a great mistake, a terrible error, if we believe that the young Jew does not want to be Jewish. We make a terrible error. He hungers for it, and he thirsts for it. But how can we blame those Jews whose Jewish heroes on campus are Fidel and Che and ho, ho, ho? How can we blame them? When did they ever hear of a Jewish freedom movement in which they should have pride? They know about a national liberation movement in Mozambique. They don't know of a Jewish national freedom movement known as the Irgun, or the Sternists, or the Haganah. They don't know this. And how should they know it? How should they know the name Dov Gruner? And how should they know that long before the Arabs awoke to a national consciousness, the Jewish freedom movement was fighting the colonialist, imperialist British?
So again, this is 100% like all of these other emigre terrorist groups at the time. The movement of Ukrainian nationalists in the ABN, their whole slogan was death to, Bolshevik imperialism or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
This is so familiar to me, everything about it, from the style of bombings to the connection with different intelligence agencies, whether in the US or maybe in this case also Israel, down to the language that's used to rationalize it. It doesn't, that does come from some sort of, anti-imperialism that's going on at the time, but one that's explicitly against the leftist national liberation ideas, right?
Yeah.
Although he does mention the Haganah, which is the armed wing of the labor Zionists too. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, at this point, Kahana's in Israel, but the story of Kahana and the JDL isn't over yet. The JDL is still pretty young. It continues on without his direct kind of day-to-day control. And he goes on to do kind of crazier things in Israel. And that's where we're going to pick up next time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, next time we'll talk about the kind of end of we'll see what we get to, but his career in Israel, the JDL without him, and up to his death, assassination.
So the next episode will be the last in this little series.
I think so, unless it's too long, and then it will be 2, but we'll see.
Okay.
Yeah. So there we are. Finally got to the JDL.
Yeah, interesting. I'm curious about his possible connections with the gangsters. That would be interesting to explore.
I'm very curious if there's more connections to these kinds of, ABN type whackle groups
for sure,
that
yeah.
might initially be apparent. Because I think that actually runs even deeper, and I plan on talking about this next time. But when we start getting into a little bit more of him developing this religious philosophy, and there's, again, in a lot of accounts of it, it's like rabbis being like, well, this is not very standard Judaism. He's kind of doing his own thing. He's reading things his own way. And I'm like, well, yeah, that also kind of fits with that kind of contemporary right-wing culture at the time. This is exactly when, we're getting some of these tradcath groups that are like, there to combat specifically like things like liberation theology and the like, and developing their own kinds of religious philosophies. And of course, not to mention things like Christian identity and the like. So that'll be kind of fun to look into as well. But I do wonder, because that I mentioned that Marvin Liebman guy, because I can't imagine that they didn't cross paths, at least with Chorba at some point, because, both Liebman and Chorba had this kind of weird career of being in these like anti-communist intelligence circles, and also kind of in the mainstream Republican right, which, Kahana obviously, went down his own path and did a different thing. But the fact that both Kahana and Chorba worked for like a South Vietnam lobbying group, and this guy was running the, Asian anti-communist league or whatever, or taking part in it at least, really makes me wonder about whether there were more connections there than are immediately obvious. And I've seen things like in newspaper articles from the time that like there may have been even some crossover between like the JDL and some of these kind of ABN, emigre affiliated groups at these pickets against like, whatever, Soviet delegation or something. But in smaller places outside of New York. So I'm wondering if there is kind of more overlap there too. I'm kind of curious to find out. But that's a lot more kind of in-depth research than we can do now. But I've just been deep in Kahana land for a while now.
I was also thinking about something that, because I started this episode by talking about how I listened to Richard Spencer.
Yes.
And so at some point in his streams, they have some Irish guy who's like smart Nazi or whatever. And he like, they were talking about the history of Jews or something like that. And that guy says how the Jews are basically like some kind of geniuses of nationalism, and they always have been that, some idea like that. And I'm thinking, like, is that true, or is that some kind of a projection that you're having? And also, like, maybe that's relevant to the Kahanism in a way, because if they are like, so we have Christian identity that possibly influenced Kahanism in some way, and
possibly,
yeah, and Christian identity is like also very much about like American white racists thinking about Jews, and then for some, I mean, this is some like